there are still firms. I know of one, and I won't name the firm, but the idea is when you get into the advisory program, in your first 12 months, you have to bring in $11 million, and if you don't, you're out. And guess who keeps the money if you don't bring in the $11 million?
To anybody listening that's new, getting in the business or wants to get in the business, run away from those programs. They are not. Welcome to the Money Alchemist podcast. I'm your host, Ben Jones, and
Brent Gargano.
And we're glad to be here with you today. We've got somewhat of an interesting topic. Brent and I have decided to, since this is really only the third episode, we thought it would be worthwhile to give the listener a little bit of color as to who we are.
Can we go back to the first episode once we figure out how to actually do this?
Well, the first episode is already out there, man.
Oh, great.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. It's already posted. So, listener, be warned. I wouldn't really listen to that one. We are going to redo that one because there's a subject matter expert I want to bring in to talk about artificial intelligence. So, I had my wife listen to it before we published it, and she's like, "It sounds like you guys don't know what you're talking about." And I'm like, well, we really don't know how large language models work.
I am a financial planner, not an AI expert. I certainly am intrigued by, what it seemingly could do in the impact of our business.
Yeah. And that's really, I think, what we talked about is not necessarily the mechanics behind how large language models work, but what their potential implications can be on the economy. And I think we did successfully tackle that subject. So despite what my wife, her concerns were,
and I think that really plays into what we want to discuss today, right? Because, what we really wanted to spend some time thinking through or just talking about is the various pathways, share a little bit about the way that you, Ben, got into the industry, the way that I got into the industry, just shed some light on the differences in some of those experiences, and then maybe just make some observations about the world today, over a decade later. And if, you're a young aspiring advisor or, maybe even somebody who wants to shift into a second career type, career changer, what might be different today and how that works. And so anyway, I think that's a good segue to that. So, what do you, what do you think?
Yeah, I would like to talk about how each of us got into the business and what brought us into it in the first place, and how someone who's younger today, out of school, if they're really interested in finance and working with people to manage their wealth, what viable pathways exist today for them to break into the business, because it's changed a lot. Technology has really changed what's possible, and it's also closed a lot of avenues that were previously available. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie with Will Smith, Pursuit of Happiness, where isn't he a stockbroker? Yeah, he's a stockbroker.
I forget. Dean Witter.
Yeah, Dean Witter. Thank you. And he just, these old school brokers would hire anyone that had the ability to talk on the phone. Of course, you had to pass your Series 7.
The boiler room, so to speak.
And they would just give you a phone number, a phone and a phone book. And it was really up to you just to dial and smile, and opening an account. This is before know your customer rules. So to open an account would just be a name and an address, essentially. And someone could open an account with a broker like Dean Witter and buy X amount of shares of whatever company, and that broker would get a commission on that trade. So this is how things were done.
And this really wasn't that long ago in time.
Yeah. So it really accelerated quite a bit in the late 80s, early 90s. But that's not how you and I got into the business. Now, my entry into the business through American Express Financial Advisors was somewhat like that. It was still living off of the fumes of the old system.
Were you selling credit cards?
No credit cards.
So let me ask you. So tell me, and I may have heard this story before, but talk a little bit about how, you got into the business. Did you get into the business right out of school, or what was?
Yes.
Okay.
So I got a degree in business administration, which is essentially the degree people in college get when they are clueless in what they want to do afterwards. So it's a very unfocused degree, just kind of generally prepares you to enter the business world, whatever that is. So when I graduated, I moved back home and I applied. This was in 2006, not to date me, but it's what is that now? 17 years ago, something like that. Anyway, so I applied to all the local companies, Procter and Gamble, General Electric, Kroger. All of them said the same thing. Come back to us with some experience. I remember I had an interview with General Electric. It was for a human resources position. And I forget the lady's name that was interviewing me. She's a very sweet lady. She says, well, what makes you want to be in human resources? And my response was, because you're hiring, which was the wrong response. That obviously did not demonstrate any passion for the potential job.
It's like saying it seems like an easy job.
Well, I basically was saying it's a job and I need a job. Yeah. I love my mom and dad, but they did not want me in their house. They wanted me to get out. So they essentially said, well, you have until the end of the summer and you're on your own. And so I was scrambling for a position, and I had a high school friend that I knew that was doing very well at American Express. So I just thought, well, I'm going to go apply to this American Express position. And it was American Express Financial Advisors, be a financial advisor. And I thought, I could do that. I go to this interview that was scheduled, and there's 26 other people there. It was a group interview. And this guy gets up there.
Make you feel really special.
Yeah. This guy gets up there and says, this is essentially a commission job. He kind of writes these. He actually did this demonstration of how the career works. Using this wheel. He says, this spoke is your natural market. This spoke are lunch and learns. This spoke is cold calls. You got to get all these spokes working for you in order to get the clients. He painted a miserable picture and said, you're going to be working Monday through Saturday, the Monday through Thursday, it's 9 to 9. Fridays, you're working from 9 to 6, and Saturdays from 9 to noon. The only time you can get out of work is if you have appointments. And I left that group interviews thinking, well, what else am I going to do? So I just did it. I said, okay, well, I'm going to sign up. And then I actually was interviewed because there was a second wave of interviews. It wasn't just like the 26 people and then they would just accept whoever off the street. There was a vetting process. So then I went and interviewed with my colleague, the friend from high school that was working for him. And he gave me the job, said, no problem. You show up tomorrow, essentially. So you went through I forget what they called it. It was like a 3-month probationary period. They had a name for it, but during the first 3 months, you had to get your Ohio Life and Health, your Series 66, your Series 7, and you had to have $1 million in assets under management, and you had to have 10 financial plans sold. Not a small undertaking. For
a 22-year-old with zero experience as a financial planner.
By the grace of God, and because I had so many good friends and family, I was able to make the cut. So less than 10% of those 26 people that were in the interview were there and made the cut. But the misery didn't stop there. So once you got those 3 months under your belt, it was grueling. It was 65 hours a week. They gave you leads you had to cold call. It was about 300 phone calls a night you had to make.
300 a night?
Well, a day, because there was two sections of calling. So you called during the day around lunchtime, and then you also called at night. And that's if you didn't have appointments.
So this is 15. I mean, I don't have a calculator, but 15 calls an hour, 10 to 15 calls an hour.
Well, most of the calls weren't answered. You
You're right. That's in a 24-hour day is my point. So if you work for a third of the day, I mean, the point is you're making 30 to 50 dials in a work hour. Yeah. You better hope they don't pick up.
No, well, most of them don't. If they did pick up, you would be dialing a lot less. But that was an experience.
That's a lot.
Yeah. But you weren't expected just to cold call people. You also had to go out and drive to local restaurants and meet restaurant owners and convince the restaurant owner to put a literal fishbowl in their lobby that people could drop business cards into, because you put a sign on there that said, win a free lunch. Of course, free is a 4-letter word that starts with F, right? So little did the people know that if you dropped your business card in there, you automatically won a free lunch, quote unquote. Everybody won the free lunch.
Call you.
Yeah. So I would go and harvest these fish bowls. So I was able to wiggle into a couple local restaurants, and I've got some stories about that. Let me tell you, I'm not going to belabor you today, but you would you would harvest those bowls, you get those business cards, you'd tell the people, you'd email them and call them and say, you've won a free lunch, bring, 10 of your colleagues to the lunch. The only cost of the lunch is that I get to pitch you at the beginning. So you would have 5 to 10 minutes to talk to this person and all his poor coworkers that he roped into this charade. The virtues of working with me as a financial advisor. It was your privilege to hear what I had to say and how lucky you were.
So here in what? So these guys, which I don't know, what was the, if you did some of these things, what's the age of these folks? Are these people in their 40s, 30s,
all
40s,
over,
50s?
all over.
So you have a table of professionals essentially that's sitting there, and in walks a fresh 22, 23-year-old try to cut their teeth as a financial planner, saying, give me all your money. You're welcome for the free lunch. And I take it that may have worked to some extent.
For some people it did. I got a total of one client.
Okay. So it didn't really work.
Process.
Okay.
So the thing I learned the most from American Express financial advisors is how not to market. This entire program was
exactly
based
what they want to be known for.
Yeah. This entire process was based on lessons learned from the 1990s. I found the whole cold calling process to be utterly miserable and inefficient. The lunch and learns, while they worked for certain people that were very outgoing and they had I don't want to insult used car salesmen, but used car salesmen have a tendency to be bubbly and outgoing and very conversational. And that's not me. I'm a little too analytical for that. So it just didn't work well. But what did really work well is leaning on people that I knew or was acquainted with through what they call your natural market. This could be, members of a community that you're in, or friends of a family. Your alumni groups for a local university. So, really anything, any natural market that you have where there is already an established trust. And then you work with the individuals in that natural market and you really add massive amounts of value for them. And then they're going to refer you. That's what worked for me. But anyway, I'm getting off point. We're talking about our career trajectory. So that's how I started, was with American Express Financial Advisors, very traditional, not traditional, but old school marketing style of dial and smile and long hours, very salesy, very transactional. I did not like that. So ultimately, I left American Express to go to a position where I thought, rather than hunting for these clients, let me go where the money is. and the money's at banks. And National City Bank, which is a bank out of Cleveland, was hiring financial consultants for their branches. So I thought, well, there we go. I'm going to go there. And that's where I went. And I got hired there. And then I can detail that later. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about how you got into the business, because your experience, I think, is a lot different than mine.
Well, there's two takeaways that I have from what you just talked through. The first one is that what's worked last decade doesn't always necessarily work for the next decade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you think about the tenure that you and I have had, we're now, you know, past our first decade. So, you know, that's not going to stop. And I think that is, you know, something to be mindful of. How do you stay relevant in a world that's changing and not getting too stuck on what has worked in the past? And secondly, what you also want to do is you don't want to do something for the sake of getting business. You know, to me, what's really changed in this decade is that we're so connected over things like social media. People want to feel like they're connecting to a human. They want authenticity. They don't want you showing up at a lunch because your company told you this is how you get leads. They want you showing up in an organization or a group that serves a purpose in your life that's more meaningful and deeper than being a financial advisor. And you let the financial advisor really be the secondary focus, you know, because you're really there to plug into your, you know, passions and what you know, care about as a person, as an individual. And then if you do that in an authentic way, you know, the conversations will come up and what have you. And it's right. So I think that, to me, you know, things are going to work differently in the future than they have in the past. And, you know, purpose matters. If you're doing the right things for the wrong reasons, they're probably the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, to, I guess, juxtaposition that with my upbringing. So I have a very different background. Coming into college, I had a science background. I was part of a program in high school that led to essentially a whole charade of science fairs my senior year. We ended up actually winning the local university science fair. And so I went to that school, University of Cincinnati, and ended up with going in as a biology major. You know, if you know, you're winning these science fairs, you assume I should be doing science. So I, you know, went through freshman year, sophomore year, a lot of these weed out classes, you know, general biology, general chemistry. And I was working on the side. I had a job. I was actually parking cars. So it was a great college job. I got to drive all sorts of fun cars, worked with my buddies. It was a great time. But I had this money that I was saving up on the side from the tips that I was making. And I've always been a saver. I joke that I've always been a personal financial planner. It just took a long time for me to realize it. So I took some of the money and I started investing it. I think it was at the time, actually like a USAA account was, I think, what it was. It eventually became a Fidelity account. Anyway, so I started investing, and I was a sophomore, you know, midway, back half of sophomore year. And I still remember sitting in my inorganic chemistry class, not paying a lot of attention to what the teacher was saying and researching stocks. And it kind of hit me in that moment. Like I'm sitting in class and I'm thinking about something productive, but it's not the class.
Yeah.
And that was a realization for me. So I went to the guidance counselor and I said, what does it take to get a business degree? And their answer was, I mean, basically the way that it worked out was I was going to have to do another 2 years of college. And so I didn't like that. It seemed like I wasn't going to be working and gaining real world experience for a couple additional years. And I was going to have to pay tuition to do that.
Yep.
And so I was, you know, like a lot of people that are in their back half of college, quote, ready to get out and work. You know, funny how that perspective changes a couple years later. But in any case, ended up switching my degree to chemistry. Simply because I thought it was more analytical.
Yeah.
I had a knack for numbers. I have a math brain, and so chemistry. I like chemistry. I didn't dislike it. And graduated in 4 years with a chemistry degree, and immediately I knew I want to go into finance. But how do I do that? So here in our region, we have a Fidelity call center. So you can go, what's great about these call centers at Fidelity is you have all sorts, so many different jobs there, from back office jobs, people processing paperwork, to frontline service jobs, resetting passwords, to, full blown, ultra high net worth wealth management phone based jobs. Mm-hmm. Okay. And everywhere in between that. So a lot of jobs, a lot of opportunity. And the greatest thing to me about getting started at Fidelity was, as opposed to what you got, which was, hey, here's, how you need to make out all these outreach. Fidelity basically says, you're going to have, between 20 and 50 people calling you every day. Please pick up the phone and, have a good conversation with them. Right. So the name of the game really isn't go find people. The name of the game is to connect well and be thoughtful and, in my mind, the way I kind of looked at it is I needed to be smarter than whoever was calling me, whoever their current advisor was or whoever they were working with. I needed to be able to find some areas of opportunity and, not only connect with the person on the phone call, understand their need and broaden the conversation, but then be able to pinpoint an area that's lacking and really get the person thinking. So to me, what was great about that was I took the angle of how do I deepen my expertise over the first 7 years. Yep. So I joined the Financial Planning Association. They happened to need somebody to take over their young person.
How did you discover that?
My great question. So when I got out of college, one of the most influential things, and I should have mentioned this before, one of the best things that happened to me was I moved in with a mutual friend. Mm-hmm. I moved in with a guy who moved in with a mutual friend. His name's Andrew Lippert. He's a couple years older than I am. And at the time he was already a certified financial planner, and he's also very, very interested in this stuff. So, from the get-go of starting at Fidelity, I had a mentor that had a head around planning, was very, active and engaged. And one of his friends was actually already in the group. So we went to a meeting with the Financial Planning Association together. And what was going on was that the guy that ran the group needed, he was moving. And so he needed folks to take it over. And my buddy and I lived together. We liked this stuff. So we became, we kind of co-ran it for a period of time. And that was really neat. Eventually he stepped away because he became a CFA. Mm-hmm. If you know anything about the CFA exam, good luck running a social organization while you're studying for that. So that was a good opportunity. That organization, what that really allowed for me in my career was to get exposure to exactly what we're talking about here. Here's my pathway. I'm at Fidelity. I would then go to a conference with, 50 other young people. Some of them worked at banks, some worked at insurance companies, some worked at independent RIAs, some of them worked at the Fidelities of the world. And so you got to see all these different perspectives and get exposure and understand what's out there. So at the same time, I got my CFP. I did the coursework in 2014, passed the exam, and that essentially laid the foundation, like the knowledge foundation. For me, I've always been a little ADD and awkward and don't know what to say. So the best thing that Fidelity was able to do for me is I had to pick up, I'm talkative. So, I took less than the average number of calls per day than a given rep. But let's say I picked up 20 phone calls in a day. Mm-hmm. For me, the best, aside from just the knowledge, it was the ability to, talk to different people and catch up really quickly and just, actually get along with people. So to me, there are good and bad things about Fidelity that we can get into when it comes down to what the best way to go about things. But what I thought was really valuable was I didn't have to sell out a bunch of my college friends and cold call anybody and blah, blah. The things that I learned along the way, I had ample opportunity to just sit there and basically practice. And I developed and honed my communication skills. That was really necessary for some of the next steps that I was taking. So it was looking back, I feel very fortunate to have, I don't want to say stumbled into, but it's similar to your story. How did it happen? It was a friend. I had a friend that worked there, and I feel fortunate to have stumbled where I did, because admittedly, Ben, I don't know that I could have put a fishbowl in a restaurant and taken business cards and showed up there, as
you'd be surprised what you can do when your mom's about to kick you out of the house.
Well, maybe that's fair, but I guess I'll say that, that definitely, the level of kind of hustle that it takes is tough.
Well, one thing as you're talking that caused me to think about is just, it's interesting how our entry into the business has probably colored our perception of the value we bring. It took me a long time to understand that what we do is actually a very valuable thing for our clients. I would approach my value proposition almost apologetically. Like, well, since you don't know how to do this through a discount broker, or maybe you don't know about a discount broker yet, or all these other, DIY solutions, I'm sorry, here I am to actually do these things for you. And I look at the services I provided very transactionally. And it took me a long time to realize that no, we're not just doing the commoditized services for clients, the trading, the asset allocation. Heck, anybody can do that. What we're doing is we're saving the clients valuable time. We're also double and triple checking their work. Prior to this podcast, we were talking about how we can better work together with tax planners to discover not just tax savings, but correct tax issues. You were mentioning how, one of the big things that we do is unwinding incorrect Form 8606 forms, which accountants don't really do. That's kind of what we do. And you're not going to get that with a discount and service. And
we don't mean to beat up on the accountants. We also mentioned that part of the reason that this is messed up is because the timing, there are tax forms that are generated by some of the things that you do. You would like to believe that these tax forms all are generated prior to tax time for you to hand to your CPA and say, here's what I did. It goes in my tax return. But turns out some tax forms don't come out until later on in the year. And unprompted, you need to know to tell your CPA to do that, or the CPA needs to know to ask about it.
Few people know that. And that's why that's one of many areas a dedicated financial advisor adds value, but I didn't
put the glue and be the quarter. I know what's going on with the IRAs. I know what needs to be brought up. I know what tax form's not going to show up. So how do we?
But I did not appreciate that because I was dialing 300 dials a day, bothering people, and that colored my perception of the value I bring. Whereas you being at Fidelity, people were calling you because they value. I mean, they would wait in queue to talk to you. And you probably, not that you became arrogant because of that, but that had to demonstrate to you that, hey, what I do is valuable to people, so much so that they go out of their way to talk to me.
What's interesting is, you get anything and everything that comes to you. So when somebody calls in, they may have a stated need that's fairly point blank. They're calling an 800 number. They're not expecting to have a consultative experience necessarily.
Yes. Yeah.
They're calling in with some level of stated need, something going on. maybe they really understand it. Maybe they don't know what they don't know, range of spectrums. And your job was to understand the stated need, catch up to what they already knew about it, open up the conversation to understand more about the circumstances so that you could then enhance whatever the stated need was and find a way to deepen the relationship with Fidelity, because at the end of the day, they're business and they want these people as clients. Yeah. Right. So, where it would be tough is where, you'd have somebody call you that their expectation was, look, man, I just want to do X, Y, Z, and to your point, I didn't ever want to feel like a bother. So frankly, if you were there and you said, look, I don't want to talk about X, Y, Z, whatever, I would say, hey, here's what I do. Here's what I'm here to do. If you have a time, it'd be great to do it. And there are other calls that you can take. You don't have to feel like you've got to pester somebody. So, yeah, and
I don't like to pester people either. I
don't think anybody likes to pester people or be pestered, in all fairness.
Some people.
I don't know anybody that just say they like to do it, even if they seemingly, from the other person's perspective, do.
For sure. So, now I don't want to say that what I did back then was not valuable. It absolutely was, because I've enhanced my knowledge. I've enhanced the services I offer quite a bit from when I first started, but generally what I did is the same.
So why do you think this has changed like it has? Because I don't think that's just you. I think to our previous point, you came out in 2006. You know what didn't exist in 2006 that came out right as I was starting? Robo-advisors.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. And you said something earlier. You said, asset allocation is a commodity. Robo-advisors, when I got out, it was, are robo-advisors going to get rid of advisors? No. But what it did was it forced advisors to really get serious about what the heck it is we do to provide value outside of rebalancing your portfolio, because a computer can do that. So looking forward, back to our AI conversation, now we've got this AI in the picture. The thing that's really great in some ways is it is going to push, the advisory profession. In my opinion, it's going to push the advisory profession to do better, to show why we are, better than going to Google Bard and typing in a question.
Well, one thing's true. We don't hallucinate advice. Most of us don't, at least. Well, some advisors, man, but, that is interesting, and I think that's a good segue into the next phase of this conversation, which is, for new advisors coming into the business, what are some, in your mind, what are some pathways to success? The way I got into the business, I don't think you can do it anymore. So I went through the last remnants of the old school, throw them against the wall, see who sticks method that brokers use, like Dean Witter. Merrill Lynch got their name that way. American Express was that way. There are a few remnants. I think Edward Jones still has their advisors knocking on doors, but I don't think it's done as I think it's done as like we're your friendly neighbor, here's where I am.
There are still I can tell you from knowledge. Yeah. There are still firms. I know of one, and I won't name the firm, but the idea is when you get into the advisory program, in your first 12 months, you have to bring in $11 million, and if you don't, you're out. And guess who keeps the money if you don't bring in the $11 million?
To anybody listening that's new, getting in the business or wants to get in the business, run away from those programs. They are not built with your interest in mind.
Yeah. You got to take somebody who has no experience, doesn't necessarily have a good handle on what does it actually mean to be a wealth manager. He's going to have to learn these things on the job. And then you've got to have them go out and in 12 months convince, folks to move over $11 million. That's easier said than done. Let's say that. So, it's one thing to convince somebody to buy a car from you or, buy, XYZ, name a point in time sale, but to convince somebody that it makes sense in their best interest, you are there for their best interest and they should move their entire life savings under your control, not just today, but for years to come. Just, that
is a tall order.
That's a tall order.
Yeah. And it's nearly impossible to do that as a brand new advisor right out of college. So, the way I came into the business, I would not advise. It was grueling, depressing at times. There was even a point in my career that I tried to get out. I tried to get out of the business, and ultimately, I'm too stubborn, so I hung on. And now I'm super glad I did. But I don't advise that newcomers go my path. But I think that the path that you took is still viable. Another path that I see as a viable solution are existing wealth management companies looking for new blood, so to speak, to help them bring their practice into the new world, with large language models. So just being familiar with all the different types of technology that's out there, which most young people are in tune with these things, at least more so than the average advisor, I think, is 55, 60.
Yeah. I mean, so that's where I was going to go, which is that if you look at not just the age of the average advisor, but the age of the average client, there's so many statistics that we have read about, baby boomers and, basically what's next. There's this pig in a python, concept of, as baby boomers have gotten older, the economy has followed, so in the 70s and 80s, it was things that were related to growing families and things like that. Well, now it's medicine and all these things that folks need as they get older. So the point I'm making there is that there are a lot of folks that either currently own businesses or getting ready to retire, want to retire soon or just recently retired. And then there's a lot of advisors that also fit that bill. So there's ample demand for new advisors.
Yes.
The problem isn't, creating brand new books. In my opinion right now, it's servicing the folks that are going to demand financial advice.
Exactly. So if I'm 20 something looking to break into the business, what I'm looking for are established independent advisors, preferably those that are seasoned, with maybe they're looking at retiring in 10, 15 years, but they need to bring in a junior advisor, someone they're willing to train up and show them the ropes and introduce them to clients, introduce them to the process, and then eventually use them as a potential succession plan. That is the pathway to success. Now, I also think joining good companies like Fidelity, that path, the path that you took is still available. And in some ways, it is a path that grants you a broader selection of choice. For example, like if you work at Fidelity in the call center, maybe you decide, I think I'm going to go the portfolio manager route, and you want to go and get your CFA designation, and or maybe you want to become a wholesaler, or maybe you just want to go into management. So there's all sorts of different pathways that you could take, starting in a company as big and broad as Fidelity. So that is a better choice in some ways for someone who's very uncertain. But if you are very certain that I want to be a financial advisor, I want to be an asset manager, I really think the best thing for you to do is to join a small or not so small investment advisor firm as a junior or a paraplanner. Yeah.
So what kind of skills, if you're somebody in college, maybe you're a rising senior right now, or maybe you're, just looking to figure out what the next step is. I mean, what skills would you focus on developing so that as you transition into that role, you can be successful? So
communication skills, period. There's other skills, but that's the most important, because your effectiveness as a financial advisor relies entirely on your ability to clearly communicate and distill complex concepts to individuals. And not only that, you want to be able to communicate with your staff and your superiors. So communication skills, I think, are paramount. You also need to have a mind for analysis, because I've been doing this for 16 years. There are still concepts that confound me and confuse me and tie my brain into knots. And I have to sit down for 20, 30 minutes and try to unwind them. And, I don't have the sharpest analytical mind, but it is better than average, I would say. So you need to have a mind for analytics. So if numbers make your mind freeze up, you do not want to be in this career. So communication skills are important, but they can only get you so far. You need to have a combination, in my opinion, of good communication skills, but also an analytical mind.
Yeah. And, I think there's a lot to be said for it. Kind of depends on what firm you're at too, because,
True.
What we also know being in the industry is there are a lot of, I don't want to say small, because small is a relative term, but, $100 million, RIAs or investment advisory firms in the country, and they all have different makeups and different objectives and things they do well and not so well. So to me, one of the other things, just thinking about being a young person and maybe trying to manage a transition, is something you mentioned before, is your ability to, use technology and what have you. But, these owners, they want they ultimately, you want your clients to be well taken care of, and you want to know that the system's not falling apart. So they, recognize that as a young person, while you might not have direct experience with financial planning, your ability to still have logic and reason and process improvement is fairly, intact. So I think it's important to think outside of the box, and be able to problem solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So to tie this all up in a bow, the one thing I want to leave our listeners with is, especially those who are young and, going into new careers, or maybe this is your first or second or third or fourth year of college and you're uncertain what you want to do. This is a phenomenal career route to take. I am incredibly grateful that my career path has led me down the road that I'm on. It is a very rewarding career, could be potentially lucrative, but you basically can be financially rewarded for how hard you work, because it's very geared toward entrepreneurs. Unlike some careers, like you went into chemistry, tried to become a self-employed chemist.
Yeah. And that was part of what I realized. I have opinions and thoughts and beliefs, and it's hard to,
it's not impossible. You could somehow come up with some sort of compound like WD-40 and then market that yourself, so it's possible to do it, but it's not very common. You're probably working for a firm like LyondellBasell or something like that.
Doing research,
but so if you really want to be a business owner and you want a good pathway that's really low barrier to entry for opening and operating your own business, being a financial advisor certainly is at the top of the list, in my opinion. It is a difficult career but rewarding career, and I encourage folks who have an entrepreneurial spirit, who enjoy money. Who doesn't enjoy money? The topic of managing money. And like working with people, I encourage them to really look into it and pursue it. So with that said, Brent, do you have anything else to add?
I guess the only thing that I thought is, we talk a lot about college, and students that are trying to transition. I think there is, maybe a whole nother discussion, but there's a lot of value to be said for there are a number of people these days that are taking on second careers, as advisors. Maybe they were engineers or corporate finance people or attorneys, and folks are, basically realizing that you don't have to be, a salesperson in a suit to be an advisor. If you have competence and you understand money concepts and you like planning and you can, maybe you have some kind of niche, it can be a rewarding career. And so I think that I think we are going to continue to see more of that, because again, back to what I said at the beginning, I think people these days are looking less for, hey, have you been doing this for 40 years, et cetera, and more, can I trust you? Are you authentic? Are you true to who you are? And so anyway, with that said, that is my final comment, and I appreciate the time, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a good conversation. We'll revisit it later. I do have an idea for another episode, and that is the different kinds of firms that are out there, because we were very generic today, and our recommendation for who to pursue if you're looking for a career in this business. But there are so many different types of financial services firms, and not all of them are equal. So we'll have a follow-up episode where we detail the differences between, things like a broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, captive versus independent, so forth and so on. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to catching you next time. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory services offered through National Wealth Management Group, LLC, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial, LLC. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. This information is not intended as authoritative guidance or tax or legal advice. You should consult with your attorney or tax advisor for guidance on your specific situation. Brent Gargano is not affiliated with LPL Financial.